October 26, 1943. 1,400 hours. The Bismarck C. The lead torpedo bomber, nicknamed Ghost, emerged from the dense, tropical cloud cover carrying a weapon that would fundamentally transform naval interdiction in the Southwest Pacific. The Allied air crews called it the Iron 8 after its devastating array of forward firepower. The Imperial Japanese Navy, IJN, was losing the war of attrition, but they had perfected one defensive doctrine that seemed unbreakable: the armored convoy shield. Their lifeline to the resource-rich southern regions, oil, bauxite, and rubber, depended entirely on these supply fleets. The Allied strategy of island hopping meant nothing if the materials to defend the next island kept flowing unimpeded. Since the beginning of the campaign, Allied air forces had hammered these convoys using traditional tactics: high-altitude bombing, which was inaccurate, and low-level torpedo runs, which were catastrophic for the attackers. The IJN's defensive transformation had begun after the crippling losses sustained in the early island battles. Admiral Nishimura, commanding naval defense operations, had studied every Allied air assault since the disaster at Midway. He reached a revolutionary conclusion that contradicted years of accepted naval doctrine: the Americans could not be stopped by relying solely on aircraft carrier duels. In his bunker, feet beneath the reinforced concrete of the Rabaul Command, Nishimura had drafted Defense Order No. 7. On January 1, 1943, the order stated, "We shall not retreat from convoy escort. We shall allow the enemy bombers to approach. We shall let them come to us, and we shall kill them from positions they cannot effectively reach." The mathematics of defense had changed. In the early battles, attacking American torpedo planes had been eliminated in seconds by concentrated anti-aircraft fire, netting only a few ship kills for immense aerial losses. Now, here, escorting the crucial Operation Kikusui supply line, Nishimura commanded transports and cargo vessels, hidden within a screen of destroyers and heavy cruisers. The protection had involved extensive retrofitting of every escort vessel. Every ship carried a minimum of 24 anti-aircraft guns, meticulously coordinated for interlocking fire. This dense concentration of fire created a lethal zone starting feet from the convoy's perimeter, a flak field that Allied pilots referred to grimly as the Shrapnel Dome. The construction of this airtight defense had involved of the IJN's available light artillery, approximately heavy guns and light machine guns, working in extreme conditions across months of deployment. Temperatures on the gun decks reached, with toxic fumes from cordite powder filling the enclosed gun tubs. The Japanese had created what military analysts considered the most sophisticated, short-range anti-aircraft network of World War II. 20 ships had essentially created a square-mile fortress on the water. They had calculated for every American weapon, the low-level skip bombing technique, the mast height torpedo run, and the high-altitude area of effect saturation bombing. They had built their flak patterns accordingly, assuming the conventional maximum range of Allied fixed-forward guns was insufficient to engage them outside the range. But they had calculated for every Allied weapon except one, a modified medium bomber that could deliver a devastating volume of fire at distances they considered tactically impossible. The weapon that would break the Shrapnel Dome had been born from desperation in a machine shop miles away. The weapon that would fundamentally change the air war against convoys was not a new bomb or a new rocket, it was the radical re-engineering of a common airframe, the Allied B-25 medium bomber. The genesis of this innovation stemmed from the disaster at the Battle of the Palawan Strait months earlier. Torpedo bombers and dive bombers, the standard tools for fleet interdiction, had been effectively neutralized by the sheer volume of Japanese flak. The solution came through collaboration between the Southwest Pacific Air Command and a small, highly aggressive team of ordnance specialists led by the maverick engineer, Chief Warrant Officer Reese. Their mandate: develop a precision attack that could neutralize the source of the flak, not the target ship itself. According to official engineering records, teams at an undisclosed base in northern Australia began modifying the B-25 airframe in February. The technical designation was AFT modification, developed specifically for point defense suppression missions in the Pacific. The technical specifications documented in the Air Force records revealed the truly revolutionary nature of the modification. The standard bombardier's position, the glass nose, and the co-pilot's forward controls were stripped out. In their place, a solid metal cone was fitted, housing an unprecedented battery of fixed guns. The original 4-caliber nose guns were quadrupled. The final configuration included 8 forward-firing caliber, 12.7 mm, machine guns, 4 clustered in the solid nose and 4 mounted in side blisters, all synchronized to fire forward. These 8 guns were fed by rounds of specialized armor-piercing incendiary, API, ammunition and controlled by the pilot. The nose effectively became the world's largest and fastest-moving machine gun turret. Initial tests over the isolated in June demonstrated that the synchronized guns could project a foot-diameter rod of solid lead and fire that maintained lethal density for up to. This was 3 times the effective range of the Japanese anti-aircraft gun. Observers discovered that the high-velocity, API rounds, delivered at a cyclic rate of rounds per minute, could penetrate up to of light armor plating even at long range. More critically, the incendiary core was designed to ignite the high-explosive shells stored near the gun tubs and traverse along the ship's length. The aircraft, now flying at mast height, was no longer a bomber or torpedo plane, but a heavy aerial gun platform, a gunship. February 19, d. Hours. The first combat deployment of the gunships occurred on the crucial convoy route, miles west of Rabaul. The standard attack tactics had been proving costly. Now, the new technique was simple: fly low, fly fast, and fire outside the flak envelope. The engagement on February 19 was the moment the mathematical certainty of the Japanese anti-aircraft defense dissolved. According to 5th Air Force records, the strike force approached the convoy at wave-top level, maintaining a wide, low formation. At hours, when the lead aircraft, Ghost, was still yards out, well outside the effective range of the Japanese guns, the pilots opened fire. Official after-action reports described the immediate effect. Streams of concentrated caliber tracer fire maintained lethal density for hundreds of yards before smashing into the target destroyer's forward deck structure. The high-velocity API rounds shredded the thin-skin gun tubs and ignited the ready-use ammunition stored nearby. Within seconds, the destroyer's main anti-aircraft battery was engulfed in smoke and secondary explosions, effectively silencing its entire port side defense. The Japanese defensive manual, captured after the battle, had dedicated only a short section to attacking medium bombers, assuming they would be maneuvering for bombing or torpedo runs and thus be vulnerable to sustained flak. It did not anticipate an aircraft whose sole purpose was to act as a flying machine gun platform with a lethal range extending $/math 1000 \text yards beyond $their own defense perimeter $. The physics of destruction were simple yet devastating. The rounds per minute stream delivered a concentrated energy transfer that traditional armor simply couldn't handle. Immediate effects included direct destruction of gunners and their guns from the sheer volume of impacting metal, ignition and detonation of high-explosive stores from the API rounds, creating massive internal explosions, and the suppression effect, the terrifying sound and visual impact of 8 heavy machine guns simultaneously firing directly at their position, causing gun crews to abandon their posts or dive for cover. The Air Ordnance Group, which perfected the API ammunition mixture, documented that the rounds, hitting at such shallow angles, would tumble and fragment inside the superstructure, maximizing damage to control systems and gun directors. A single sustained burst of seconds from one B-25 could render a destroyer's flak protection useless. The 5th Air Force after-action report documented, February 19, hours, anti-aircraft silenced, cargo vessels on fire. Friendly casualties, 1 aircraft lightly damaged, 0 crew wounded. Enemy killed, estimated gunners and crew. This represented a complete and terrifying reversal of the expected casualty ratios for convoy attack. Radio intercepts decoded by the Allied Pacific documented Admiral Nishimura's frantic communication revealing their unpreparedness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The devastating success of the Iron 8 gunships was not merely a tactical victory, it was a psychological catastrophe for the Imperial Japanese Navy's defense doctrine. The coordinated flak shield, the pride of Admiral Nishimura's strategy, was now revealed as fatally flawed. Radio intercepts decoded by Allied intelligence units immediately following the February 19 attack documented the Japanese command's sheer panic and complete lack of preparedness. February 20, 0800, request immediate countermeasures for enemy 8-gun aircraft. Their range is unacceptable. February 20, 1430, all units, fixed-nose, heavy-caliber aircraft are priority targets. Do not engage within 2,000 meters. February 21, 0600, evacuation of forward positions authorized when fixed-gun aircraft approach. Gunners cannot maintain positions. February 21, 1800, escort commander requests permission for evasive maneuvers. Cannot maintain course against concentrated, long-range fire. The combat operations drove immediate battlefield modifications documented by IJN maintenance units. Initial problems included gunners refusing to remain at their posts in a frantic, yet futile, attempt to weld thicker armor plate around the anti-aircraft gun tubs. Solutions included mixing seafoam with anti-aircraft shell casings to create temporary, non-flammable barriers, and deploying smoke generators on the ship's bows in an attempt to obscure the hull and reduce visibility for the attacking gunships. These desperate attempts proved ineffective. Within days, Allied intelligence documented what they termed systemic flak fatigue in the Japanese crews. The psychological impact exceeded the physical destruction. For the first time in the air-sea war, significant numbers of Japanese gunners were abandoning their positions before the attack run was even completed, choosing safety below deck rather than confronting the inevitable, long-range stream of fire. Post-war interrogations of captured Japanese sailors revealed the terror these weapons inspired. Crewmen described the noise of the synchronized 8 guns, a continuous, ripping sound, as the demon's zipper or the dragon's rasp. The prisoners taken during subsequent operations, mostly survivors of sunken vessels, represented the first significant naval surrenders of the campaign. Interrogations revealed many surrendered specifically to avoid the terrifying fate of being immolated or shredded by the concentrated fire. This unprecedented break in discipline represented a complete breakdown of the strict warrior code that had sustained Japanese naval resistance through previous battles. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The lessons learned from the first deployment were immediately applied and refined, transforming not just how convoys were attacked, but which targets were prioritized. The gunship's strength lay in its ability to deliver an overwhelming volume of fire to a specific, hardened point on a ship, neutralizing the escort before the vulnerable cargo ships could be sunk. The first major systematic employment of the evolved tactics came during the assault on the crucial Palau Supply Depot convoy 2 weeks later. Japanese forces had constructed a formidable screen of 10 escort vessels around 5 massive, high-value oil tankers and ammunition transports. Lieutenant Colonel Devlin, commanding the Bombardment Squadron, Heavy, documented the new operational doctrine, conventional reduction of escort defenses estimated % aircraft loss. Gunships will execute preparatory suppression before the torpedo planes advance. Marine Corps records show the systematic reduction proceeded in a grid pattern. The gunships, operating in flights of 4, no longer focused on sinking the escorts, but on permanently eliminating the ship's ability to fight back. They targeted the centralized fire control directors and the bridge structures, using the armor-piercing rounds to bypass light armor and destroy the nerve center of the ship. In one documented action, the pilot of the B-25 Valkyrie targeted the bridge of the destroyer Asagumo. The second burst of 8 guns not only destroyed the fire control position but also took out the ship's primary radar mast and severed communication lines, effectively blinding the vessel. Multiple positions were found disabled or abandoned before the low-level torpedo planes were even committed. The operation demonstrated that Japanese forces were choosing preservation of crew and hull integrity over a suicidal fight for their position, unprecedented on this scale. The success even prompted experimental modifications on the ground. Airfield maintenance crews, working under intense pressure, developed the splash and skip technique, modifying the gun sight depression to allow the tracer stream to intentionally hit the water meters from the target. The impacting rounds would skip into the side of the hull, often below the waterline, causing localized flooding while simultaneously suppressing the topside anti-aircraft positions. This dual-effect technique made the gunships terrifyingly effective, creating a no-win scenario for the targeted escorts. Colonel Takamura, commanding the Naval Air Fleet, had studied the American reports and attempted to counter the gunships with aggressive deployment of long-range fighter patrols. However, the B-25's heavy forward armor and tail guns proved highly effective against head-on fighter passes, and their low altitude made interception difficult for the Japanese aircraft. The Iron 8 remained the undisputed champion of the convoy attack, its firepower negating the determined resistance of the Japanese sailors. The operational success of the Iron 8 was only possible due to massive industrial support that went far beyond the aircraft itself. The sheer logistical demand of the modification demonstrated an American industrial capacity that Japanese forces simply could not match. The gunships required an astronomical amount of specialized ammunition. The armor-piercing incendiary, API, rounds were manufactured in purpose-built chemical plants in the American heartland, requiring specific alloys and chemical compounds for the incendiary cores. The Air Ordnance Battalion, specially created for this campaign, documented the staggering daily consumption of caliber API at peak operation. Navy construction battalions and specialized air depot teams built fuel storage, rearming facilities, and bespoke gun synchronization shops even during combat operations on hastily constructed forward airfields. By the peak of the campaign, the infrastructure included high-speed electric reload mechanisms for the gun bays, forward mixing stations for specialized lubricant and cooling fluids, and miles of dedicated transport lanes for the heavy ammunition crates. The entire supply chain, from the stateside chemical plants producing the incendiary compounds to the forward maintenance sheds, highlighted a disparity in industrial output that was, in itself, a weapon. Japanese military assessments documented in post-war interrogations by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey acknowledged that the combination of the gunship and the relentless supply chain had negated their entire convoy defense strategy. Some Japanese naval leaders testified this reality influenced later strategic retreat considerations more than the loss of specific carriers. The ability of the Allies to produce and field a weapon that required such constant, immense logistical support demonstrated a depth of resource that the IJN, relying on sporadic supply runs and artisanal maintenance, could not comprehend, let alone counter. The 8-gun nose was a symbol, it was the embodiment of the assembly line beating the warrior spirit. General Kurosawa, in charge of naval logistics for the southern area, transmitted a final message before his capture, acknowledging the grim truth: the enemy's relentless ability to produce and fire this volume of metal has overcome our fleet's courage. Our spirit cannot stop a stream of 8,000 rounds per minute. This message, intercepted by Allied radio intelligence, confirmed the decisive impact of industrial power on the naval war. The defeat was not just tactical, it was an industrial one. The lessons from the gunship gambit were immediately codified and applied to all subsequent naval operations, and they fundamentally altered the course of naval aviation development for decades. Official military histories trace a direct lineage from the B-25 to modern-day close air support platforms. The fundamental principle, using high-velocity, high-volume fire to suppress and neutralize hardened point defenses, remains relevant to modern naval warfare doctrine. The Air Force's official history states, the development of the fixed-nose gunship was the single most significant American technical innovation in the naval air campaign. Against the Japanese convoy defense, these weapons proved decisive in neutralizing escort screens that would have cost hundreds of aircraft and thousands of airmen using conventional torpedo or dive bombing tactics. Admiral Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet, noted in his confidential report, the fixed-nose gunships proved to be the most effective weapon for the systemic reduction of naval flak defenses. Without these aircraft, our losses of irreplaceable torpedo bomber crews would have been infinitely greater. The comparative analysis was stark. Traditional convoy attacks required multiple waves of vulnerable aircraft, with two expected losses per mission to achieve limited results. The gunship operations could neutralize multiple escorts per hour with minimal friendly casualties. The 8 gunships initially deployed to the Southwest Pacific saved countless airmen's lives and preserved valuable aircraft assets. The Japanese perspective, documented through post-war testimony and captured documents, confirms the total negation of their defensive strategy. Forces that had been prepared to die in conventional combat found themselves helpless against a form of attack that rendered their defense systems useless at a safe distance. This technological defeat preceded and enabled the physical defeat of their supply lines. The psychological burden on the B-25 gunship crews, however, was unique. Veteran administration studies conducted post-war found these crews experienced combat stress at higher rates than conventional bomber crews. The intimate nature of the low-level attack, the visual and auditory awareness of the immediate enemy casualties, created unique psychological challenges. While the weapon was hailed as a savior of Allied lives, the crews who flew the Demon's Zipper carried a distinct and heavy moral weight from the intimate delivery of such overwhelming violence. The Battle of the Southwest Pacific convoys ended not with a massive, decisive fleet action, but with a whimper, a systemic cessation of organized resistance from the escort screens. The ability of the gunships to engage and neutralize the enemy's most cherished defensive weapon at a distance proved the fundamental truth of industrial-age warfare. The Japanese defenders had staked their strategy on the concept of area denial, a yard-flak dome that they believed was impenetrable. The Iron 8 proved that this defense was merely a matter of engineering and logistics. The streams of concentrated fire that could maintain lethal density up to yards didn't just suppress the anti-aircraft guns. They cleared away the illusion that courage and determination could overcome overwhelming technological superiority. The Japanese crews who abandoned their guns when confronted by the B-25 gunships made a rational decision when facing a technology that rendered their prepared positions into death traps. Their careful preparations, based on traditional air attack expectations, proved worthless against a pilot who could eliminate them while remaining completely outside their effective range. The deployed to the campaign proved a fundamental truth: victory belongs not necessarily to the brave, but to those with the superior tools and the industrial capacity to employ them effectively. The Japanese defenders discovered that naval spirit could not stop an armor-piercing round, that determination meant nothing when rounds per minute were directed at their precise position from a distance they couldn't reach. The systematic destruction of the vital supply convoys was complete by the summer of. The convoy losses crippled the Japanese ability to reinforce their island garrisons. The failure was a testament to the fact that, in the arithmetic of modern war, industrial capacity multiplied by technological innovation equals victory, regardless of the human courage on the other side of the equation. The B-25 gunship stands as a permanent testimony to the moment when concentrated air-to-surface fire transformed the nature of naval interdiction and demonstrated the decisive power of technological surprise in modern combat. The impact of the gunship was perhaps most acutely felt not in the cockpit, but in the highest echelons of the Imperial Japanese Navy Command. Admiral Nishimura, the architect of the supposedly impregnable convoy defense, was forced to confront the weapon that had rendered his entire strategy obsolete. His final message, transmitted before his flagship was sunk during a desperate final sortie, provided the most damning evidence of the Iron 8's decisive power. The message, intercepted and decoded by Allied intelligence in early, read, "Enemy fixed-gun aircraft have neutralized our anti-aircraft screen. Positions requiring months to fortify are destroyed in seconds. American velocity has overcome Japanese preparation. We cannot maintain positions against the concentrated fire." Post-war testimony from the few Japanese naval survivors confirmed the deep sense of terror and hopelessness these weapons inspired. One officer, providing testimony to military historians, stated that sailors who had faced certain death courageously in traditional naval battles fled from the B-25 gunships. The weapon created a form of defeat that contradicted their concepts of honorable military service, being systematically gunned down from a safe distance before they could even return effective fire. The lessons learned by the Allies immediately influenced the planning for Operation Cartwheel, the subsequent offensive thrust toward the Japanese mainland. Joint Chiefs of Staff documents indicate planners urgently requested the production of thousands of the specialized caliber API rounds and the conversion of additional B-25 airframes into the gunship configuration. The demonstration that concentrated, high-volume fire could systematically neutralize naval flak defense altered every invasion calculation. General Devlin, commanding the tactical air units, described the conversion in his after-action report as three-dimensional warfare, fighting simultaneously above the water, on the surface, and, most importantly, outside the enemy's effective defensive envelope. The gunships became the template for subsequent low-level strike aircraft, demonstrating that technological specialization could overcome numerical superiority. The Navy's reliance on the traditional inch gun and the cannon for anti-aircraft defense had been fundamentally exposed as inadequate against the terrifying lethality of the American machine gun, multiplied by 8. While the B-25 gunship was celebrated as an essential tool for reducing Allied casualties, its method of warfare introduced unique moral and legal challenges, documented extensively in military chaplain and legal reports. The nature of the attack, systematically killing the men manning the anti-aircraft positions with overwhelming, distant fire, was brutally efficient, yet morally complex. Military chaplains reported increased requests for counseling from the gunship crews compared to other bomber units. The intimacy of the low-level passes, combined with the visceral sound of the sustained gunfire and the visual confirmation of the destruction, created a high degree of combat stress. One chaplain noted in his diary that the pilots understood the necessity, but struggled with the finality of firing 8,000 rounds per minute directly into the bodies of men who could not shoot back effectively. Despite the moral qualms felt by some crews, military legal reviews conducted during and after the war confirmed the legality of the gunship's use under international law. The weapon was not specifically prohibited by the Hague or Geneva Conventions. Its use against military vessels and their defensive positions was considered legitimate under the laws of war as understood in. Post-war war crimes trials did not prosecute the use of the fixed-gun aircraft, which was deemed a proportional and necessary response to the Japanese Navy's use of highly hardened anti-aircraft positions that could not be neutralized by less destructive means without unacceptable Allied losses. The National Archives contains extensive documentation of the operations, including detailed war diaries and technical assessments. These records consistently highlight the gunship as a breakthrough in naval interdiction tactics. Photographic evidence from combat photographers shows the characteristic flash and smoke from the 8 guns firing simultaneously. This visual record, now preserved in military archives, captures the weapon's devastating effectiveness against naval fortifications. The deployment of the specialized gunships represented more than just tactical innovation. It demonstrated how industrial specialization and technological adaptation could fundamentally alter combat dynamics. These weapons negated the defensive advantages that the Japanese Navy had spent years creating, primarily their reliance on short-range, dense fire. The concentrated streams of metal that could be projected across vast distances didn't just silence the guns, they obliterated the Japanese naval doctrine of close-range defense. The legacy of the B-25 gunship is preserved not only in military records but also in the quiet dignity of post-war reconciliation. The annual reunion of naval honor ceremonies, meetings that bring together former Japanese naval personnel and Allied aircrew, document how former enemies found common ground and shared, traumatic experience. At the anniversary reunion held in, Japanese and American veterans met at sites relevant to the naval battles. Japanese survivors openly acknowledged the technological effectiveness of while American veterans expressed profound respect for the courage of the Japanese gunners who, despite the futility, attempted to maintain their positions. These meetings, documented by military historians and cultural organizations, provide a crucial perspective on the conflict. Japanese naval veterans acknowledged that the weapon presented a choice between honorable, but suicidal, resistance and survival. The ability to create a clear technological gap made the decision to flee or surrender a rational act, overriding the deep cultural imperative to fight to the last man. The few remaining veterans of the units, whose final testimonies have been recorded for historical preservation, consistently emphasize both the necessity and the horror of the gunship warfare. One former gunship pilot, Captain Hayes, testified, "It was a butcher's job, but it was our job. Every stream of fire we sent down was a life we saved back home, because those anti-aircraft guns couldn't shoot down our bombers or torpedo planes." Ultimately, the 8-gun nose served as the ultimate proof that the war in the Pacific was fundamentally a conflict of industrial capacity. The Japanese forces prepared for a battle of individual skill and morale, but they found themselves facing a technology that negated both. Their fierce determination meant nothing when API rounds, produced by a tireless American industrial base, shredded their defenses from a distance their own weapons could not reach. The legacy of the gunship on the naval war is singular. It was a decisive innovation that shortened the campaign, saved thousands of Allied airmen, and, by its very existence, forced a change in Japanese naval doctrine that ultimately reduced the scale of the conflict. The streams of concentrated fire that flew across the Bismarck Sea demonstrated that in modern warfare, technological superiority is not an advantage, it is the precondition for victory. The story of the B-25's 8-gun nose is a potent reminder of how the smallest technical detail, the conversion of a glass bombardier position into a solid metal wall of death, can shift the entire tide of a global conflict. The initial gunships deployed to the Southwest Pacific campaign proved a fundamental truth: the battle is won not just by courage, but by adaptation. The Japanese Navy's flaw was not a lack of courage, but a failure to foresee and adapt to a weapon system that broke the long-accepted rules of naval aviation. They prepared for torpedoes and high-altitude bombs. They were defeated by a flying, oversized machine gun. Their commitment to the anti-aircraft gun, excellent at close range, became a strategic anchor. The moment the Allies found a way to deliver overwhelming force outside that gun's protective bubble, the entire defense system became a self-contained death trap. The concentrated fire of the Iron 8 was the perfect counter to the concentrated flak of the Shrapnel Dome. In the final accounting, the numbers speak for themselves. The systematic convoy destruction deprived Japanese forces of essential supplies, directly enabling the success of subsequent Allied land campaigns. The cost to the Allies was minimal, while the cost to the Japanese, the loss of supplies, ships, and, most importantly, the psychological will to defend, was catastrophic. Today, preserved B-25 airframes stand in museums, sometimes with the intimidating nose proudly displayed. They are monuments to more than just a successful aircraft, they are monuments to the strategic power of a single idea born from desperation and fueled by relentless industrial capacity. They remind us that military history is often written not by the grand fleet battles, but by the engineers and airmen who found a way to bypass the enemy's strength entirely. The B-25's 8-gun nose represents a lesson still relevant in modern warfare: the most feared weapon is the one the enemy didn't know they needed to defend against. The story of the gunship, the Iron 8, offers a timeless lesson in strategic asymmetry. The Japanese Navy, in their meticulous preparation, focused all their resources on creating an extremely effective short-range defense. Their success in turning their convoys into floating fortresses was undeniable. But in doing so, they created a strategic vulnerability, a brittle defense that failed completely the moment a technology could bypass the outer layer. This principle echoes across military history and beyond, from the heavily fortified Maginot Line being skirted by panzer divisions to modern cyber defenses being exploited by zero-day attacks. The crucial lesson is not about the caliber round itself, but about the inflection point where one side stops fighting the enemy's strength and starts exploiting their self-imposed weakness. The pilots who flew the gunships weren't just attacking ships, they were attacking the very foundation of the Japanese naval doctrine. By destroying the fire control centers and silencing the guns from yards out, they weren't just saving their own lives, they were proving that the enemy had strategically misallocated their defensive resources. That realization, that their best efforts were now meaningless, was the true psychological weapon the Japanese commanders feared. Today, military planners still reference the as a textbook example of weaponized doctrine negation. It's the difference between beating an enemy in a fair fight and changing the rules of the fight entirely. The Japanese were prepared for a boxing match, the Allies showed up with a rifle. The ultimate tragedy for the Japanese Navy was that they were constantly adapting to yesterday's battle. They learned to defeat the torpedo bombers of the past, but they were blindsided by the aerial gun platform of the future. The B-25, originally a standard medium bomber, was transformed into an entirely new class of weapon, the first true aerial anti-defense platform. Its enduring legacy is a stark reminder that in any conflict, the side that adapts the fastest, and has the industrial might to mass-produce that adaptation, will prevail. The cost of a few B-25 conversions was the collapse of an entire regional supply strategy. That is the arithmetic of war. Now that you've heard the full story of the Iron 8, the weapon that broke the will of Japan's best naval defense, I want to hear from you. The technological leap from a standard bomber to the gunship was monumental. It took ingenuity, desperation, and unbelievable industrial muscle. My question to you is this: what do you think was the single biggest factor in the gunship's success? Was it the sheer volume of fire, the rounds per minute? Was it the specialized API ammunition that turned metal into fire? Or was it the strategic decision to simply fly outside the enemy's maximum effective range? Jump down into the comments right now and let us know your thoughts. We read every single one, and we'll be highlighting the best answers in next week's video. And while you're down there, take a moment to hit the like button if you were captivated by this deep dive into industrial age warfare. It tells the algorithm that you want to see more of these untold stories from military history. More importantly, if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe and turn on that notification bell. Building these detailed, historically accurate narratives takes thousands of hours of research and scriptwriting. Your subscription is the fuel that keeps our own industrial capacity running. We're dedicated to bringing you the best, most comprehensive military history content on this platform, and your support is absolutely vital. We've explored how one technological shift redefined air-sea battle. But the innovation didn't stop there. As the war progressed, the Allies developed weapons designed not just to destroy but to manipulate, to turn the enemy's own environment against them. This next story shows a weapon so secretive, so terrifying, that its testing almost destroyed the entire project. It's a look at the weapon developed for the final phase of the Pacific War, a weapon that had to be kept hidden at all costs. The strategic shockwave of the gunships forced the Imperial Japanese Navy, IJN, into desperate and innovative, though ultimately futile, counter-responses. Admiral Nishimura's successors, tasked with maintaining the supply lines, quickly realized that the problem was not the ship, but the predictable nature of the defense. The primary adaptation was the introduction of flying flak barges, officially designated the Type 10 Auxiliary Escort Platform. These were not traditional warships, but heavily modified, slow-moving barges and shallow-draft vessels towed outside the convoy perimeter, sometimes up to yards away. Their sole purpose was to act as a distraction and to extend the anti-aircraft net. They were equipped with surplus and even heavier guns, weapons with a slightly longer range than the standard. The strategy was to draw the B-25 gunships into engaging these heavily armed, but low-value, targets, forcing them to expend their limited API ammunition before reaching the main convoy. A second tactic was the implementation of night flak blindness. Utilizing newly developed short-range search radars and powerful parabolic searchlights, convoys began moving exclusively under the cloak of darkness. The hope was that the lack of visual confirmation would negate the extreme precision required by the B-25 pilots to hit the tight, vulnerable gun tubs. While the B-25's could still locate the convoys using radar, the low-level, high-speed attack run in total darkness significantly increased the risk of ditching or missing the target structure. However, the Allied response to these adaptive tactics was swift and decisive, proving the ultimate industrial and intellectual advantage. The B-25 airframes were rapidly fitted with specialized low-light amplification sights, early versions of night vision, that could provide pilots with just enough visual contrast to maintain their aim. Furthermore, the gun nose was used not just for fire, but for intimidation. Pilots developed the Thunder Run tactic, flying directly toward the flak barges at maximum speed, firing a short, concentrated burst that often panicked the less experienced crews on the barges, causing them to cease fire or abandon their posts before the main force of B-25's arrived. The introduction of the in-barges, while extending the range, also created a new vulnerability. The larger guns required heavier and more volatile ammunition. When hit by the API rounds, the resulting secondary explosions were catastrophic, often sinking the barges instantly and creating massive fireballs that served as giant, irresistible beacons for follow-up attack waves. The IJN's attempts to counter the Iron 8 only served to confirm the B-25's fundamental superiority. The Japanese were pouring precious resources into defensive platforms that merely offered larger, more explosive targets. The American technology and industrial capacity always stayed 2 steps ahead. The success of the gunship was as much a triumph of pilot training as it was of technology. Flying a medium bomber at wave-top level, often below feet, at maximum speed, directly into an oncoming wall of flak, demanded an entirely new level of skill and nerves. The B-25 was notoriously difficult to handle at these low altitudes, especially when fully loaded and trimmed heavily by the forward gun assembly. The Air Training Group, Special Operations, was established specifically to train the Iron 8 crews. The training was brutal and unforgiving. Pilots had to master a technique known as flat spin recovery, a necessary skill if the plane's tail clipped a wave during the high-speed maneuvers. They practiced repeatedly over dummy targets in restricted bombing ranges, learning to hold the plane steady during the full second burst of the 8 guns. The simultaneous discharge of rounds per minute created a tremendous backward recoil and torque that could violently pitch the nose up or yaw the aircraft off course if the pilot wasn't perfectly braced and coordinated. Crucially, the crews were trained in target zoning. They were taught to visualize the escort vessel not as a ship, but as a series of foot-by-foot zones, with of the firepower directed at the zones containing the primary anti-aircraft guns and fire control systems. The goal was to achieve of the enemy's ability to fight back, not necessarily to sink the ship. This surgical approach minimized the expenditure of the precious API ammunition and maximized the psychological impact. The average crew was younger and often more aggressive than standard bomber crews, reflecting the high-risk nature of the mission. They were selected for their exceptional nerve and precision. The unit commander, Colonel Devlin, fostered a unique culture within the squadron, one of high professionalism combined with almost arrogant confidence in their machine. They referred to their missions not as bombing runs but as disarmament exercises. The psychological stress was immense, yet the morale was high because the mission was so clear. They were directly saving the lives of their comrades in the torpedo and dive bomber squadrons who no longer had to face the lethal flak dome. The airmen knew their mission was not just destructive, it was preventative. This sense of being the flak breakers created a deep bond within the squadron. Post-war analysis showed that while the units suffered high stress levels, their mission success rate and survival rate relative to the damage inflicted were exponentially higher than any other low-level attack aircraft of the war. They were the perfect marriage of human skill and technological force. The impact of the B-25 conversion extended far beyond the Pacific theater, permanently altering the relationship between airframe design and mission specialization. The proof that transforming an existing airframe for a highly specialized, concentrated firepower role was faster and more effective than developing a new aircraft from scratch. This principle became the basis for several post-war airframe modifications. Firstly, the success accelerated the development of anti-armor weaponry in fixed-wing aircraft. The idea of using high-volume, high-velocity rounds to defeat lightly armored targets led directly to the design philosophies behind the Korean War-era close air support aircraft, culminating in the adoption of the cannon as a standard anti-ship and anti-vehicle weapon. The concept of the aerial fortress nose became a model for future gunship designs, prioritizing a dense, frontal shotgun pattern over precision bomb placement. Secondly, the extreme logistical demands of the API ammunition supply chain forced the U.S. industrial military complex to fundamentally rethink forward ordnance support. The high consumption rates necessitated the creation of dedicated, containerized reloading units that could be quickly deployed to austere forward operating bases. This innovation in logistics, matching the supply chain's speed to the weapon's consumption rate, is a direct, uncredited legacy of the gunship program. The ability to supply rounds daily to a remote Pacific island proved that American industrial power could overcome any geographical obstacle. Thirdly, the Japanese were not the only ones taking notes. German and Soviet intelligence, reviewing captured data after the war, were profoundly influenced by the B-25 gunship's performance. The Soviets, in particular, adopted the idea of large-caliber, fixed-forward guns on ground attack aircraft, recognizing the efficiency of focused firepower against hardened ground and sea targets. The success of the gunship served as an economic and political testament to the effectiveness of industrial spending. The cost of the entire program, including the aircraft, the conversions, and the millions of rounds of API ammunition, was dwarfed by the cost of losing a single major fleet carrier or the high casualty rates associated with continued conventional convoy attacks. The 8-gun nose was a powerful argument for the efficiency of strategic technological investment. It proved that sometimes, the most cost-effective weapon is the one that forces the enemy to stop fighting altogether. The deepest fear the Japanese Navy harbored regarding the B-25's 8-gun nose was not the visible fire or the tangible destruction, but the fear of the invisible, the technology they couldn't see and couldn't counter. The Japanese military machine was built on the principle of Kisho, fighting spirit, believing that superior determination and courage could overcome technological deficits. The gunship, however, was designed to defeat Kisho itself. It removed the opportunity for a heroic fight. The concentrated, distant fire created a form of death that was impersonal, inescapable, and rapid, leaving the gunner no time to even fully comprehend the threat, much less fight back effectively. The gunship broke the implicit contract of close-quarters naval combat. In a sense, it was the ultimate application of the principle of concentration of force. By stripping the bomber of its payload and dedicating all its structural resources to 8 synchronized guns, the Allies achieved an unparalleled density of firepower on a single, fixed point. No existing Japanese naval platform was designed to withstand that kind of surgical, concentrated volume. The B-25's legacy is defined by this psychological victory. Its pilots demonstrated that the technological ability to dictate the terms of engagement is more valuable than any other asset. They forced the naval war to be fought at yards, a range the Japanese guns could not reach, thereby turning the Japanese Navy's defense into its greatest liability. Admiral Nishimura's entire defensive strategy was predicated on drawing the enemy in close. The Iron 8 proved that American ingenuity had found a way to win without accepting that invitation. The gunship was, in its final analysis, the embodiment of American industrial and intellectual dominance. It was the fusion of an aerodynamic platform, specialized ordnance, and precise intelligence, resulting in a single weapon system that achieved complete strategic victory over an entire military doctrine. Today, military strategists look back at the B-25 and recognize it as a pivotal weapon that demonstrated the devastating power of adapting existing technology to create a specialized, surgical, and technologically superior countermeasure. It remains the reason why, to the last Japanese naval crewman who faced it, the 8-gun nose was the most feared weapon in the Pacific. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.